Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, July 7th, 2026. So, tonight I'm going to be talking about what I estimate is the most important book that I've ever read on a child's development, which includes, most importantly, our own development as children. I think this book, The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller, is a book that every therapist owes to their clients to read because there's so much in it that speaks to the client and the therapist relationship. I've read this book somewhere in the neighborhood of 5, 6, 7 times. I'm not sure the count. The first time I read it was in graduate school, and that was that moment in graduate school where I realized that there was a whole river of energy that was operating unconsciously in myself and in everybody, and that my life then would become about understanding that energy, understanding what's flowing, what's driving, what's underneath me. And there was this experience of, oh my gosh, it's so big. There's so much to work on. So tonight I thought about, I don't really need to read this book again. I have slides that are made up, and I can teach from my experience of having read it so many times from my past. But I decided to go ahead and read it again, and to start my slides, my presentation, my podcast from scratch this evening. And what I found to be remarkable, it was as if I had never read the book. I could not believe the gems and the richness that were within its pages. And that even is said after I've said all of this incredible praise about this book and experience. So I cannot emphasize enough, if you're a therapist, if you work with people in a helping profession, if you are a parent, and maybe most generally, if you're, of course, a child of parents, which we all are, I implore you, invite you to read this book. It was written back in 1979, and so it was ahead of its time. And one of the things I think you'll find as you read this book is that so many of the themes that we kind of imagine are coming out new today. The research, the technology that's giving access to brain imaging and to the developing brain is new, and what we find out is that these ideas have been in place for 50 years or more, and in some cases much longer than that. So before I get into tonight's broadcast in specific, I'm going to talk about our housekeeping items. If you're not aware, if you would like to do a deep dive in your own work, in fact, the Drama of the Gifted Child, the book that I'm going to be talking about tonight, really is the template for the kind of work that we do. Our flagship program, we call it our Finding You Intensive, is for you. If you want to springboard into your work, if you want to accelerate your work, if you want what is, in my estimation, 2 years, maybe a year's worth of therapy, and in 5 days, this is that offering. It's a deep dive into your own family history, a deep dive into the emotional experience and confrontation with your childhood. Not just the bad and negative, but all of it, how it shaped you. What were the messages that you have now internalized and that have become a part of you? So if you're interested in that, Finding You Intensive, August 5th through 9th is that next offering. It will sell out. So if you're interested, sign up sooner rather than later. September 9th after that. For those of you who have been listening, if you are in a couple and you've thought about doing a Finding You Intensive together, the November 11th through 15th Finding You for Couples is that offering. We generally don't allow for partners to come to the same intensive, the Finding You Intensive. So this is that once a year offering. I will be running it. So if you're interested in doing your work and you want to do it with your partner, which I can think of no more valuable time than to understand both yours and your partner's dilemma and how they match up together, this is that opportunity. November 11th through 15th, we're announcing it in plenty of time. So if you're interested, sign up soon. Limited spaces available, and of course, I'll be running it. For all other inquiries, for couples, for individuals, for families, for private intensives, if you're looking to attend our monthly support group, which is on the third Wednesday of each month, the next one being July 15th, or if you are looking for a coach or a therapist who works in this model, reach out to us via our website portal or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. Next week I'll be gone, and what I'll be doing, I'm excited to be heading back there again, is I'll be at the Omega Institute, co-founded by Ram Dass, by the way, which really goes to the heart of the work. The Audacity workshop that I'll be hosting, facilitating with my daughter Emma, is in Rhinebeck, New York at the Omega Institute. in the Hudson Valley, a couple of hours outside of the city. So if you want to do an experiential workshop, it's around $500 for 5 days. We did it last fall, and we loved it so much. We accepted the invitation the following Monday to come back again. So we're excited to be going back out there July 12th through 17th, around $500. You have to find your own lodging. They have lodging on site, but it's a really affordable workshop to have that face-to-face experiential family of origin work. I'll be at the Art of Living Retreat Center in the fall, September 27th through October 2nd, again with Emma, teaching this same workshop, The Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible Rotten Self. So if you're interested in either of those, if the timing works out one for instead of the other, or the location is better for you, go to the Omega website at eomega.org, or go to the Art of Living Retreat Center website at artoflivingretreatcenter.org and go to the workshops tab and sign up there. If you're not aware, the Finding You Inner Circle is launched. So if you're looking to invest in these podcasts, if you want access to the live broadcast to be able to interact, if you want access to the Ask Me Anything episodes, that is available to you as an Inner Circle member, either as an alumni or if you subscribe. It's just $10 a month or $100 a year, so it's really affordable, but it's an opportunity to contribute to the podcast and to attend the live episodes. So with that, let me get into tonight's broadcast. I think the most important thing I would say about the drama of The Gifted Child is that it is an invitation to really come to terms with what is going on in your unconscious. I think so many people, when they think about therapy, if they have no experience with it, they really are considering it as we must, from that conscious place. What do I know? What have I learned? What are the skills? What are the tools? But psychotherapy, and the kind of psychotherapy that we practice, really relies on the idea that so much of what is driving our behaviors, what is shaping our relationships, first and foremost, of course, with ourselves, and secondly, with the people in our lives, is unconscious. So if you're going to do this kind of work, there has to be at least some willingness to consider that the most impactful motivators driving your behavior and your life, for that matter, may be found in understanding your unconscious processing, your unconscious work. The things that you experienced that shaped you into who you are, to who you become, that have largely gone unnoticed for various reasons that I'll talk about tonight by your conscious mind. So understanding that it's like the proverbial tip of the iceberg. What we see, what we're aware of, is just the tippy top surface. And that most of the mass is underwater. And water, by the way, in dreams and in allegories, when we talk about this kind of work, often is a metaphor for the unconscious. And it makes sense, right? You look into water and everything is distorted. You see shapes, you see some vague colors, but everything is kind of distorted. And it's only when you dive into it with eyes wide open that you begin to grasp the exact nature of the energies lying beneath it. So underneath that tip of the iceberg is this vast reservoir of energies. And what most people do is they avoid that altogether. They consider that what they know, what they're aware of during their waking hours, is really all that there is in this work. But we know that so much of what we do is reflexive, automatic, and unfiltered. It isn't, we experience it as an instinct. And if we don't go backwards and look deeper and unravel things, we will imagine that who we have become is about, nearly solely about us. But context matters. And the context, of course, that matters most is the primary caregiver. And the most formative part of our life is the first handful of years. I can't even begin to share with you an estimate of the numbers of folks who tell me that in psychotherapy that they don't have a lot of memories of childhood, let alone early childhood. And because of that lack of knowing it and seeing it, they think it's not important. It's not like we go back and remember things that we didn't remember. It's just that they become more into the foreground, the focus. As we understand how we're operating today, we see ourselves getting triggered in relationships, conversations, situations, circumstances by various people. And if we spend some time reflecting, spend some introspective time on that, sharing it with another person so they can bear witness to it, we will discover that what makes us up is in large part described so very well by our histories. Now, I know in every equation, in every person, there are two parts. There's the given, right? The genetics, the things that you have and nobody virtually has any control over. But then there's the made. And the expression of those genetics, the way that they show up, is so radically affected by our context, by the relationship with our early caregivers, by their own internal world. It's so radically affected by it. It's almost as if those things that were inherent in our genetics, in our bodies at birth or conception, really weigh on the scale so lightly compared to what has happened to us. So we have to go back. We have to look. We have to confront, understand, and sit with. This is not an attempt to look for excuses or blame. It's an attempt to understand. I was just talking with my family the other day, and we were talking about history. Not our own history. We were talking about studying history. And I thought, I wish I could go back to high school and listen to my history professors. And I wish I could have understood from them at the time. And I think they tried to explain it to me, but I was so resistant. How important it is to study history. Because if we don't study our history, we are essentially living at its mercy. And the likelihood of replicating patterns without a careful and critical look at our history, either collectively or individually, personally, the risk of repeating those things is increased dramatically by our avoidance, by our unwillingness to look at it. So the unconscious process is a critical part of it. I'm going to share with you several quotes, some of them longer than others. And then I'm going to speak to them, and I'm going to take these all. Every quote that I share with you tonight is from the book, The Drama That Gets a Child by Alice Miller. In the opening sentence, the opening paragraph, she writes this: experience has taught us that we have only one enduring weapon in our struggle against mental illness. And this is important. She says, it's the emotional discovery of the truth about the unique history of our childhood. I think that word emotional is really important in this sentence. It's not the intellectual understanding of it. It's coming into contact with it in an emotional way. When I went to my first intensive as a participant, I remember thinking, I had a PhD at the time. I'd had more than a decade's worth of therapy with my current therapist. And I'd had several years of therapy with previous therapists in young adulthood and adolescence. So, and I'd studied and reflected, and I thought, I'm aware of my issues. I'm aware of my issues with my father, issues with my mother, issues with my birth order with my siblings, issues with our socioeconomic situation with my grandparents. I could even bear witness to the generational transmission of certain pathologies as I watched my grandparents treat my mother a certain way. And then her sharing with me, I became her confidant, of course, her sharing with me what that experience was like. I had a pretty good vantage point to see the makeup of the issues that shaped me, that helped to form me. So I went back with some skepticism to a program where we essentially operated in the same way that we operate at Finding You. I went back to talk to my parents to go through exercises where I could engage in role plays and talking to people that would play the role of my parents and others from my family of origin, and to speak to the little younger version of me. And while I can tell you right now that no new information came up specifically, the emotional experience of sitting with those dynamics, those relationships, was sublime. It was a kind of knowing that goes beyond anything that a book, anything that intellectual interpretation or analysis can offer. It was understanding how and really recognizing how that energy still lives in my body to this day and is affecting every relationship, and most importantly at that time, the most difficult relationships that I was grappling with in my life. Experience has taught us that we have only one enduring weapon in our struggle against mental illness: the emotional discovery of the truth about the unique history of our childhood. We must try, she says, in a long process to discover our own personal touch, a truth that may cause pain before giving us a new sphere of freedom. If we choose instead to content ourselves with intellectual wisdom, we will remain in the sphere of illusion and self-deception. The damage done to us during our childhood cannot be undone, since we cannot change anything in our past. We can, however, change ourselves. We can repair ourselves and gain our lost integrity by choosing to look more closely at the knowledge that is stored inside our bodies and bringing this knowledge closer to our awareness. Some of these sentences, by the way, sound like things that we in the media and the way that it's being presented, it sounds like things that are being presented just for the first time. But Alice Miller back in 1979 was using language like, this information is stored in our bodies. The body keeps the score. This path, she goes on to say, although certainly not easy, is the only route by which we can at least leave behind the cruel, invisible prison of our childhood. We become free by transforming ourselves from unaware victims of the past into responsible individuals of the present, who are aware of our past and are thus able to live with it. And here's the take home. Most people, she suggests, most people do exactly the opposite. Without realizing that the past is constantly determining their present actions, they avoid learning anything about their history. They continue to live in their repressed childhood situation, ignoring the fact that it no longer exists. I've been doing this for 3 decades now. Some version of what I'm doing with you tonight: teaching, talking, doing therapy, writing, speaking events, parent workshops, and so forth. And what I can tell you today, July 7th, 2026, the truth contained in this book is not only resonant with my intellectual experience, my observations with my clients, but virtually everything in this book is something that I can now recognize in myself. So I would encourage you to give it a try. In the past, when I've recommended this book, when I've done broadcasts, like this is probably my 4th or 5th one of these, I've always given it with a caveat, with a warning. I've worried because parents, mothers specifically, have come back to me and said that it was so guilt-inducing for them because they were reading it through the lens of being the mother or the parent. So the first thing I would say to you is it's really important. You know, I do so much teaching around child development and parenting on all of these broadcasts. And I've received the feedback over the years from people that don't have children that they would like more information on relationship circumstances, psychological issues that don't relate to raising children. But I have to say each time, when I'm talking about parenting, I'm not just talking about you as the parent, as the adult. There are implications in everything I teach around child development and parenting that are applicable to your life. So instead of maybe tiptoeing around the fact that this could be guilt-inducing, I would say today that resistance and the guilt that comes up with it is one significant sign about how much You and I need this book and the information in it. It's critical that we be willing, as Alice Miller says repeatedly in this book, to tolerate the discomfort, the guilt, the shame, the fear, the unpleasantness. I remember some years ago during a group supervision class, my group supervisor, who was an incredibly gifted clinician and supervisor, shared with the group, observed with the group at one point. She said about a certain therapist, she said, it seems that this therapist has a very different goal than the client. We were all, of course, very curious to find out what that was. She went on to explain that the therapist seems interested in helping the client feel good, regulating the nervous system, feeling calm, feeling peace. And the client, on the other hand, was interested in truth. Even that truth which disturbs, which causes a person to be unsettled. So we have to go past the sentinels of guilt and shame to do this work. If we don't spend any time, if we find a way to justify our lack of participation in our own work as something indulgent, unnecessary, we will forever be at the mercy of our histories, and we will assume that it's just fate, that it's happening to us. Alice Miller writes, every childhood's traumatic experiences remain hidden and locked in darkness, and the key to our understanding of the life that follows is hidden away with them. So it's not just that the pain, and by the way, it doesn't have to be big T stuff. There are big T pieces in many people's stories, right? That obvious trauma that everybody can identify. But it's the small T stuff. Largely, it's the small T stuff. In fact, as I've explained in my broadcast on big T and small T trauma, even when we're talking about big T experiences and events in your life, we're still thinking about small T trauma. Because trauma isn't the thing that happened to you, as many often teach. Trauma is being left with those feelings that are overwhelming and too large for the individual. Being left alone with them. So when we don't go backwards, we lose access to so many rich resources, so many gifts, so much energy that is locked in the unconscious with these memories about what it was like to be us. She talks in this book, her kind of diagnostic range is limited in this book in what she talks about. And so I want to give you kind of a cheat to understand it. She talks about grandiosity and depression a lot. She's really talking about the narcissistic wound. That's what reminded me to do this broadcast, because the last broadcast I did was on the narcissistic wound and narcissism. So she's really just talking about the narcissistic wound. And for those of you who haven't listened to that last broadcast, I'll just remind you that the narcissistic wound is the wound of not being seen and loved and attuned to as you are. It's the experience that's largely unconscious on the part of the child and the parent, that you have to show up in certain ways to be loved. Sometimes it's as simple as you're not allowed to be angry or sad. And sometimes it's more insidious and more harmful than that. Sometimes it can look like the parent has to be good. You can't be upset with them. You can't be hurt by them because they have to be good. And so you have to kind of tiptoe around and massage the parental ego so as not to offend them, not to alienate them, not to cause them to throw up their hands in exhaustion and to walk away. So the depression and the grandiosity are symptoms of the narcissistic wound that is unhealed. Now from that place, and as I've taught you, everybody has some narcissistic wounding, some very little and some quite a bit, and most of us are somewhere in between those two extremes. Everybody has some narcissistic wounding. So the way that we learn to protect against that wound, how we organize the structure of our psyche, of our psychology, the patterns that we use to accommodate, to protect that wound, that becomes our diagnosis. So when she's talking about depression and grandiosity, she's not talking about narcissism with a capital N as the diagnosis, or depression with a capital D as the diagnosis necessarily. It can, of course, end up in those two labels. But she's just talking about this pattern that the person who suffers from the narcissistic wound oscillates between, which is, I'm great because I've outrun the wolves, the lions that are chasing me. I've accomplished something. I've shown to my parents that I am worthwhile, that I am everything that they need me to be. And that is countered by the moments when we feel like we have failed. Sometimes that failure can happen right after a success, because those substitutes, right? The substitute for getting parental attention by performing is taking the place of being who you are, the child, and being understood, seen, attuned to, and loved as that child. So the substitutes, even when we're successful at accomplishing them, oftentimes are followed by or bracketed by periods of depression, of meaninglessness, of hopelessness. So depression, as she talks about in grandiosity, are other sides of the same coin. And they are the way that the narcissistic wound, the way that we see the narcissistic wound. Grandiosity, she says, is based on the concept of the false self, the self that we develop to get love and attention, what we think is love and attention from our parents. We create the false self. Grandiosity is based on the concept of the false self parading itself around and accumulating praise as a counterfeit form of love. Depression is the result of suppression, conscious denial, or repression, unconscious denial. And with it goes a significant amount of energy, creativity, meaning, and connection. The lifting of depression, and here's a great secret. The lifting of depression comes through the experience of grieving, of mourning, of feeling the emotions of the lost opportunities of your childhood, of the lost self, of what your parents were able to and not able to do for you, or they came up short. So, in other words, we have to mourn, we have to cry, we have to feel the pain in this kind of paradoxical way to lift the depression caused by the narcissistic wound. When depression dissipates, vitality is restored. And with it comes an ability to live spontaneously, to feel one's emotions: rage, sadness, jealousy, happiness, hurt, frustration, joy, etc. And that true self-esteem, and this is one of the great secrets. All of my 30 years, all of my thousands of clients, all of the reading that I've done, all of the research that I've done points me to this idea. Self-esteem is based on the authenticity of one's own feelings and whether or not they were held and seen and understood. Self-esteem is not based on the possession of certain qualities, skills, or talents. If that were true, then all of the talented people would feel good about themselves, and we know that that's not true. And people with less talents would all feel horrible about themselves, and we can see clearly that that's not the case. Self-esteem comes through a secure attachment. And the secure attachment is based principally on the extent to which the parent has done their own work in this way, gone back and looked and understood what happened to them. The true opposite, Miller says, of depression is neither gaiety nor absence of pain, but vitality. The freedom to experience spontaneous feelings. See, depression is like the word sounds. It is a depress. It is a pressing down of, an absence of this vitality. But if you have to get rid of, for example, your rage, you're going to get rid of its counterpart, which might be ecstasy. If you're going to get rid of your sadness, you're going to have to get rid of your love. So if your feelings can't be held by your parent, if they're exhausted, I'm not talking about where everybody fails just a little bit all the time. I'm talking about in a chronic way. If your parents can't sit with your big emotions because they are overwhelmed by them, because nobody sat with them, they don't even know what it looks like. They think that the job is to shape you up into the person that you need to be functional in this world. And they think that the way to do that is to shape you behaviorally. But that doesn't work. Because what happens for the child is they get rid of parts of themselves that are their gifts, their life's purpose. They get rid of who they are. And the reason they do that is because who they are, they find the experience that who they are is unacceptable, is too much, is overwhelming. And they don't interpret that. The child, and I'm talking about the first handful of years. It goes on, but that's the critical developmental phase. The child doesn't experience this consciously at all. How many of us were conscious as teenagers, let alone 0 to 5? What the child experiences is something is wrong with me. If dad is upset or frustrated, if mom is anxious, overwhelmed, then I am the problem. It is I who have to change. I must have caused that. Young children have no sense of other. They look to the face of the parent for, hopefully, for a mirror back. But if the parent hasn't done the work to go back and integrate and understand themselves, to kind of swallow their shadow, which is to bring back into conscious awareness the parts of themselves that they had to discard to find acceptance. When we look into the faces of our parents, what we will see is not ourselves, is we'll see the projections. We'll see that pattern of intergenerational trauma about who we must become in order to be found to be acceptable. Miller writes, "It is precisely because of a child's feelings are so strong that they cannot be repressed without serious consequences. The stronger the prisoner, the thicker the prison walls have to be. And unfortunately, these walls also impede or completely prevent later emotional growth." In the closing phase of his therapy with me, Dr. Miller says, a patient described the new understanding that came with dismantling this inner wall. He writes, "It was not the beautiful or pleasant feelings that gave me new insight, but the ones against which I had fought most strongly. Feelings that made me experience myself as shabby, petty, mean, helpless, humiliated, demanding, resentful, or confused, and above all, sad and lonely. It was precisely through these experiences, which I had shunned for so long, that I became certain that I now understand something about my life, stemming from the core of my being, something that I could not have learned from any book." I think these podcasts and the books that I write and others write, I think that they are essential tools to help us to reconnect to ourselves over and over again. But it's really difficult to replicate the kind of experience that this person is talking about outside of the walls of therapy. To find a therapist who has done their work and understands the project and can sit patiently with us until we discover these lost truths about ourselves, until we find that, we're going to have limited progress. Dr. Miller writes, "Quite often I have been faced with people who were praised and admired for their talents and their achievements, who were toilet trained in the first year of their lives, and who may even at the age of 1.5 to 5 have capably helped to take care of their younger siblings. According to prevailing attitudes, these people, the pride of their parents, should have had a strong and stable sense of self-assurance. But the case is exactly the opposite. They do well, even excellently, in everything they undertake. They are admired and envied. They are successful whenever they care to be. But behind all this lurks depression, a feeling of emptiness and self-alienation, and a sense that their life has no meaning. These dark feelings will come to the fore as soon as the drug of grandiosity fails, as soon as they are not able to maintain their on top position. Not definitely the superstar, or whenever they suddenly get a feeling they have failed to live up to some ideal image or have not measured up to some standard. They are then plagued by anxiety or deep feelings of guilt and shame. What are the reasons for such disturbances in these competent, accomplished people? It's fascinating. This is what we call the narcissistic wounding and the narcissistic gift. It's when we experience it even though nobody ever told us that, even though nobody else was conscious of it. We experience the attention that we receive from the bright and shiny parts of ourselves. We experience that as a kind of love. We conflate praise with love. That is why I'm so reluctant to encourage parents to share with their children the phrase, "I'm proud of you." It loads too heavily on the child. It feels like a version of love to them, like sunlight. But in a conscious awareness, saying you're proud of your child does sound like it's more about you than it does about them. So the goal for the parent is to see all of the child, to give all of the child space in your heart, in your world. But to do that, you have to undo some of the programming that was instilled in you, where only certain parts are acceptable. So as children grow up, they will expose the parts of you that you have been taught to avoid. They'll expose the parts of you that you were not allowed to be. So we get triggered by our children when they exhibit something that we were never allowed to exhibit. On a primitive level, we get jealous and envious of them. But maybe most importantly, we punish them for those parts. And so we pass on our wounding unconsciously to them. A person, Dr. Miller writes, with this unsatisfied and unconscious, because it is repressed, need will nevertheless be compelled to attempt its gratification through substitute means, as long as she ignores her repressed life history. I know this sounds severe. I know all of this sounds severe. And perhaps Dr. Miller and myself, perhaps we say it so emphatically in an attempt to draw attention to it. But what I can tell you is it's subtle, it's obvious, it's everywhere. I thought about this as I've been preparing for this particular iteration. And I thought, really, who I am, who I show up as here, is I'm a client. I'm a patient first. I'm a therapy client or a therapy patient who happens to have language and understanding of clinical ideas at a graduate level. Right? I've been to graduate school for these things. Read a lot of books since then. So I have the capacity to articulate these things at a doctoral level. Right? I hold a PhD. But really this work, most everything I do, could be traced back to the ideas that Dr. Miller talks about in this book. So if you want to understand, at least from my perspective, the most important resource it is to go back to read this book and to accept the invitation that Dr. Miller and I'm making, which is to look back at your history. Without therapy, Dr. Miller writes, it is impossible for the grandiose person to cut the tragic link between admiration and love. He seeks insatiability for admiration, of which he never gets enough of, because admiration is not the same thing as love. It is only a substitute gratification of the primary needs for respect, understanding, and being taken seriously. Needs that have remained unconscious since early childhood. Often a whole life is devoted to this substitute. As long as the true need is not felt and understood, the struggle for the symbol of love will continue. What she's saying here is this. Most people, especially if they have gifts in various areas, will spend their entire life seeking after this substitute gratification of praise. It's why so many parents, when they are invited into therapeutic spaces when they have a struggling child, respond with the idea, I'm not the one who's struggling. My life is successful. Look at what I've done. Look at what I do. But this is beneath that. This is beyond that. And one thing in those situations that we know for sure is that what you've developed is inadequate. It's not up to the task of supporting a child in their own mental health healing. So the drama of the gifted child is the story of any child who has the ability to sense or intuit what a parent needs, and then is willing to give that to the parent at the cost of what they feel, what they need, what's going on for them, at the cost of their real or authentic self. Oftentimes, folks who suffer from this at a significant level become confidants, comforters, supporters, advisors, nurses, therapists. Maybe I wasn't ready for this message. I'd seen pieces of it before, but in reading The Drama of the Gifted Child this week, I never noticed that half of the book is written to therapists who suffer from this narcissistic wound and manifested in the work that they do with their clients. Who else, Dr. Miller posits, without this previous history, would muster sufficient interest to spend a whole day trying to discover what is happening in other people's unconscious? I have said that my mother symbolically was my first client. And again, that sounds like an overstatement to some, too severe. But I can remember specifically listening to my mother's trauma, listening to the story about how she had been treated by her parents. I can tell you with some specificity about a session with my mother that my mother had with her parents in a therapy session when the therapist invited them to come for her to begin to tell her story, how it went, what she said, and how they responded. So I was practicing as a therapist in elementary school. My capacity to listen, to tune into, to track someone's information, to understand the complexities of human behavior, all of those gifts that I have were brought to bear. My two brothers were not interested in that project in the least. But for me, I was praised so much for that. I was given so much sun and so much attention from my mother. I was, in my childhood, clearly the favorite because of what I offered my mother. I was her pseudo spouse for many years. None of that being sexual. All of it being emotional. As long as the therapist, Dr. Miller writes, is not aware of this repression, it can compel him to use his patients who depend on him to meet his unmet needs with substitutes. I've said this and shared this with people. In the program that I ran for almost 30 years, I would teach from this book. It was one of the books that I would give to clients and to their families whenever I thought there was an opening where they were able possibly to hear it. I would encourage therapists to give it to similar clients, similar types of clients. And yet, over the course of my career, even though I was the one who was in charge, I was the clinical director, I was the one signing the paychecks, I only had limited success in my ability to invite therapists into this work. I thought about this week in reading the book. This is probably too strong of a statement, of a sentiment. But if somebody hasn't read the Drama of the Gifted Child, I'm not sure that I could trust them to be my therapist. If someone has not studied and understood the lessons that in my experience were taught so clearly and articulately in the Drama of the Gifted Child, I'm not sure that I would recommend to anybody that that therapist be trusted. Because the likelihood of therapy and the client serving the therapist's ego is so high if this dynamic remains unconscious that the chances of the therapist using the client is almost a certainty. You have to have a therapist who's willing. I remember years ago, I've shared this before, I posted the characteristics, what to look for in a therapist. And one of the things that I wrote is, if you're looking for a therapist who needs to be good, find a new therapist. And I had some professional colleagues that commented very critically on that idea, not understanding, of course, what I was talking about. And I was thinking about this week in preparation. Those therapists need, if you read The Drama of the Gifted Child, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. The therapist has more power. They, in essence, become a surrogate to the client. They become, hopefully, the parent that the client did not have. And therapy becomes this safe space that was not available to the child in their own childhood. But if they don't realize the impulse, the instinct, the need to be good, to be right, to not be a failure, to be worthwhile, they will unconsciously act in ways to get the client to affirm that. The therapist, Dr. Miller says, may cloak his disapproval and derision behind abstract terms like borderline obsessive, regression, destructive, but unless he explores the 3-year-old boy inside of himself, he will not see the parallel between these terms and garden variety contempt. In my work with people in the helping professions, I've often been confronted with a childhood history that seems significant to me. Dr. Miller writes, there was a mother who at the core was emotionally insecure, who depended for her equilibrium on her child's behavior in behaving in a particular way. This mother was able to hide her insecurity from her child and let everyone else. I'm going to start that over again. I'm going to start this whole section over again. Dr. Miller writes, in my work with people in the helping professions, I have often been confronted with a childhood history that seems significant to me. She goes on, there was a mother who at the core was emotionally insecure and who depended for her equilibrium on her child's behaving in a particular way. This mother was able to hide her insecurity from her child and from everyone else behind a hard, authoritarian, and even totalitarian facade. It should be noted here, and Dr. Miller makes this point. This is a direct quote from her book. By mother, she says, I here refer to the person closest to the child during the first years of life. This need not be a biological mother or even a woman. In the course of the past 20 years, many fathers have assumed this mothering function. So it's the primary caregiver, the functional mother that she's speaking of. She goes on to write, this child had an amazing ability to perceive and respond intuitively, that is unconsciously, to this need of the mother or both parents. And for him to take that role that had unconsciously been assigned to him. They become the child that the parent needs. One of the reasons why we do our work when we have a struggling child, most importantly when we have a struggling child, because if we do not understand what's in play, what we're needed, what went unmet, we will seek to get from our child what we should have gotten from our parents. We'll ask the child to finish the job that our parents do. In other words, we will show up to a child struggling with mental health issues in the service of our needs, not theirs. And that is an invariable pattern that occurs without this kind of exploration. This role, she explains, secured love, and that's in quotes, for the child. That is the parent's exploitation. He could sense what was needed. And this need guaranteed him a measure of existential security. If I can give them. I remember when I first had children, I thought that the goal was to need them. I really did. I thought needing was the highest form of love. I came to realize the hard way that in many ways needing is the opposite of love. It's not bad to need. We all need support and help. We need each other. But for a parent to need a child is fundamentally destructive. And yet sometimes I was led to believe, at least, that we protect this idea that we need our children. And for the child's development, we need to find those needs. We need to sort that out somewhere else with other adults. Needing is a taking thing. And fundamentally, loving is a giving thing. So if you show up to the child with your undone work, specifically your unconscious undone work, the work that you don't even know exists, you will take from the child aspects of them, aspects of who they are, how they're feeling. And they will either rebel or essentially grant you those gifts because it ensures their safety, their security, their belonging. This ability, Dr. Miller goes on to write, this ability is then extended and perfected. Later, these children not only become mothers, confidants, comforters, advisors, supporters of their own mothers, but also take over at least part of the responsibility for their siblings and eventually develop a special sensitivity to unconscious signals manifesting the needs of others. No wonder they often choose to become psychotherapists later on. Who else, like she said, without this previous history, would muster sufficient interest to spend the whole day trying to discover what is happening in other people's unconscious? But the development and perfecting of this sensitivity, which once assisted the child in surviving and now enables the adult to pursue his strange profession, also contains the roots of his emotional disturbance. As long as the therapist is not aware of this repression, it can compel him to use his patients who depend upon him to meet his unmet needs with substitutes. This is why therapists who haven't done their work have a hard time being wrong and bad. They, like our parents, don't want to listen to us when we tell them that we are hurt by them, that we're angry. And because they have at their disposal a complex and advanced vocabulary, they can use those ideas, that language, in the service of defending themselves. They can tell the client, you're misinterpreting what I said. You're viewing what I did through the lens of your own wound. And therefore the problem is in you, not in me. You didn't understand my intention. That's not what I meant. See, these defenses, which sound almost acceptable to the layperson, are the replication of the childhood injury that we're trying to treat. They replicate the childhood injury that we're trying to treat. So the golden moment for therapy is when the therapist is sitting and the client can say to them, this is where you came up short. This is what I was upset by. And when that golden opportunity occurs, it's a chance for the therapist to show the patient, the client, something that they had never seen before, which is an adult who has adequately taken care of themselves somewhere else. Enough so that they can sit and listen. They can accept the feelings of the child or the client, the adult client. They can accept the hurt, the anger. They can carry it. They have expanded through their work to be large enough to hold the client instead of needing to be good or right, and thus perpetuating the cycle of abuse. The very issue that they came to therapy for, to seek a relief from. No wonder why they often choose to become psychotherapists later on. So if you're feeling critiqued, criticized as the primary parent, just know that it applies to all the therapists you know. And if the therapist has done enough work and you bring this up with them, they will be elated for you to know that. Excited for you to know that. The client is essentially most readily available for their exploitation. Dr. Miller writes, most readily available for the exploitation are one's own children and one's patients, who at times are as obedient and dependent on their therapists as children are to their parents. The greatest resistance is cooperation, is what we call flight to health. I was sitting in a workshop where a therapist was presenting on resistance. And to stimulate discussion, he asked the entire audience of psychologists, mental health practitioners, to give examples of resistance. And he wrote on a whiteboard as many as he could keep up with. But after a couple of minutes of brainstorming, and the suggestions started falling off, I noticed that the one thing that wasn't up there was cooperation. In psychoanalysis, we'd call that introjection. Swallowing and taking in whole the therapist's ideas as one's own without chewing on them, digesting them, considering them. Cooperation wasn't on the board because that's how blind we therapists are. We want to be the guru. We want to be the hero. We want to be the child who soothes the mother. We want that substitute gratification. We want the praise, implied or overt. Unless, of course, we've done our own work and taken on the project of healing our own narcissistic wounding. Dr. Miller writes, a patient with this antenna for his therapist's unconscious will react promptly. If he senses that it is important to his therapist to have patients who soon become autonomous and behave with self-confidence, he will quickly feel himself autonomous and react accordingly. He can do that. He can do anything that is expected of him. But because this autonomy is not genuine, it soon ends in depression. True autonomy is preceded by the experience of being dependent. True liberation can be found only beyond this deep ambivalence of infantile dependence. We have to understand our dependence. And we have to understand what we sacrificed in the service of this dependence. When he presents material that fits the therapist's knowledge, concepts, and skills, and therefore also his expectation, the patient satisfies his therapist's wish for approval, echo, understanding, and for being taken seriously. In this way, the therapist exercises the same sort of unconscious manipulation as that to which he was exposed to as a child. A child can never see through the unconscious manipulation. It is like the air that he breathes. He knows no other, and it appears to him to be the only breathable air. So when I talk about the air that we breathe, the soup that we were cooked in, we cannot even consider it. This process that Dr. Miller is describing and I'm sharing with you tonight in reviewing her book is beyond the conscious mind. It's beyond what we know when we live in our ego. And it is often only revealed to us through these patterns of grandiosity and depression, or in areas when we are triggered by others. Many people, Dr. Miller writes, struggle all of their lives from this oppressive feeling of guilt. This sense of not having lived up to their parents' expectations. This feeling is stronger than any intellectual insight that they may have. That it is not a child's task or duty to satisfy his parents' needs. No argument can overcome these guilt feelings, for they have their beginning in life's earliest period. And from that, they derive their intensity and obduracy, which means intractable or hardened. I had to look that up. They can be resolved only slowly with the help of revealing therapy. You have to go back and have conversations with your parents, even if it's just in your mind. You have to begin to hear and listen to the messages that were given to you, that when you were young were just the truth. We think that we grew up in a normal childhood, and we didn't. We think as children that what our parents are like is the way the world is, and it's not. Dr. Miller writes about one such individual. Therapy helped her find her orientation again and again. I love that. Therapy helped her to find orientation again and again. We go back to therapy to find ourselves again and again, to see where we sit in the universe. And as she found repeatedly how important it was for her just to be able to love, to express her love without being afraid that she could be betrayed, exploited, or violated. This love gave her the feeling of being whole, as she had been before her integrity had been injured. A grandiose person, think parent who doesn't want to do the work when they have a struggling child. A grandiose person will look for a therapist only if depressive episodes come to his aid. I love that phrase. The biggest barrier to treating the narcissistic wound is success. And it is the narcissistic wound which prevents our entry into therapy. Because if we have to be good, we can't possibly need therapy, specifically individual therapy. A grandiose person will look for a therapist only if the depressive episode comes to his aid and force him to do so. As long as the grandiose defense is effective, this form of disturbance exerts no pressure through visible suffering, except when other members of the family, spouses or children, have to seek psychotherapeutic help for issues, for diagnoses, for their own woundedness. That is why so many people enter therapy and this work through the child's diagnoses, the child's struggle. Dr. Miller writes in her book, Pia, age 40, after a long depressive phase accompanied by suicidal thoughts, was at last able to experience and justify her long suppressed rage toward her father, who had severely mistreated her. This experience was followed immediately, not by visible relief, but by a period full of grief and tears. At the end of this period, she said, "The world has not changed. There is so much evil and meanness all around me, and I see it even more clearly than before. Nevertheless, for the first time, I find life really worth living. Perhaps this is because for the first time, I have the feeling that I am really living my own life. And that is an exciting adventure. On the other hand, I can understand my suicidal ideas better now, especially those I had from my youth, when it seemed pointless to carry on, because in a way, I'd always been living the life that wasn't mine, that I didn't want, and that I wasn't ready to throw away." Such profound teachings. The child becomes the object. Dr. Miller writes, the parents have found in their child's false self the confirmation they were looking for, a substitute for their own missing security. The child who has been unable to build up his own sense of security is first consciously and then unconsciously dependent upon his parents. He cannot rely on his own emotions, has not come to experience them through trial and error, has no sense of his own real needs, and is alienated from himself to the highest degree. Under these circumstances, he cannot separate from his parents, and even as an adult, he is still dependent upon affirmation from his partner, from groups, and especially from his own children. If you don't get seen adequately in childhood, you will spend your entire life trying to be seen by everybody. So we go back and we grieve the childhood that we did not have, the parent that we did not have. We grieve and let go of the idea that we had simply a good childhood. And we understand its complexities by looking at it critically, by asking difficult questions, and by willing to forge ahead through this painful path of self-awareness. To be seen is to exist. Dr. Miller writes, these people have all developed the art of not experiencing feelings. For a child cannot experience her feelings only when there's for a child can experience her feelings only when there is somebody who accepts her fully, understands her, and supports her. If that person is missing, the child must risk losing the mother's love or the love of her substitute in order to feel. Then she will repress her emotions, but they will nevertheless stay in her body, in her cells, stored up as information that can be triggered later by events. It is precisely the oversensitivity and shame and self-reproach that form a continuous thread in the lives of these children, unless they learn to understand to what these feelings actually relate. The more unrealistic such feelings are, the less they fit present reality, the more clearly they show that they are concerned with the unremembered situation from the past that are still yet to be discovered. That is essentially the technical version of if it's hysterical, it's historical. If the feeling that begins to arise is not experienced but reasoned away, the discovery cannot take place and depression will triumph. Here's a few thoughts as I draw this to a close. However paradoxical this may seem, a child is at the mother's disposal. The mother can feel herself at the center of attention, for her child's eyes follow her everywhere. A child cannot run away from her as her own mother once did. A child can be brought up so that it becomes what she wants it to be. That's the risk. I know that sounds tough, but that's the risk. And so I know that my sharing of Dr. Miller's book isn't a powerful tool for nervous system regulation, but it is the truth. It is what happens to children. A mother, Dr. Miller says, can only respond empathically to the extent that she has become free of her own childhood. She denies the vicissitudes of her early life. She wears invisible change. What the mother had once failed to find in her own mother, she was able to find in her child. Somebody at her disposal that could be controlled, who was completely centered on her, who would never desert her and offer her full attention. If the child is lucky enough to grow up with a mirroring available mother who's at the child's disposal, that is a child's development, then health occurs. Self-feeling can occur. And they can gradually develop into the growing child. Ideally, this mother should also provide the necessary emotional climate and understanding for the child's need. But even a mother who is not especially warm-hearted can make this development possible if only she refrains from preventing it and allows the child to acquire from other people what she herself lacks. So we get help. We go outside of the family if we can't find it inside of our family. We go to a therapist. We bring our children to therapy. We drop them off with coaches and teachers. And we celebrate when they find a mentor that is not us. I love what Dr. Miller says when she talks about resilience. She said it's like a miracle each time to see how much authenticity and integrity have survived behind dissimulation, denial, and self-alienation, and how they can reappear as soon as the patient finds access to these feelings. So once you get found, it's like this fountain of energy comes up. Nevertheless, it would be wrong to imply that there is a fully developed true self consciously hidden behind the false self. The important point is that the child does not know what he is hiding. One of her clients at 842 expressed this in the following way. I lived in a glass house. This was a dream he had. I lived in a glass house into which my mother could look at any time. In a glass house, however, you cannot conceal anything without giving yourself away, except by hiding it underground, and then you cannot see it yourself either. So powerful. And here's my final words to share with you from Dr. Miller. Once our own reality has been faced and re-experienced, the inner necessity to keep building up new illusions and denials in order to avoid the experience of the reality disappears. We then realize that all of our lives, We have feared and struggled to ward off something that really cannot happen any longer. It has already happened at the very beginning of our lives when we were completely dependent. Remember, this work is not a homecoming, she says. Since this home has never before existed, it is the creation of home. So if nothing else, I implore you to read the drama, The Gifted Child, to sit with a therapist and talk about it. Ask questions. Bring it to your therapist. And if you really want to use a tool to have the emotional discovery of the truth about your childhood, the Finding You Intensive is that opportunity. All right, folks, I hope this is a helpful point of contact. I will be at the Omega Institute July 12th through 17th. That's next week. If you're interested, go to the website, eomega.org, sign up using the workshop tabs, and the name of the workshop is The Audacity of You. My daughter Em and I will be teaching and facilitating. It's $500 for a week-long session. You find your own lodging, and they do have it on site. I'll be at the Art of Living Retreat Center in Boone, North Carolina in the fall, teaching with my daughter the same class, September 27th through October 2nd. Go to artoflivingretreatcenter.org to learn more. Like I mentioned, if you want to attend a Finding You workshop to have discussions with your parents, the next available one is August 5th through 9th. It's the most effective. In light of what I've told to you today, using the experiential activities we use, it is the most effective medicine I've ever been a part of administering to any client in my life. August 5th through 9th is the next opportunity, September 9th through 13th. If you want to do it as a couple, I will be running the one November 11th through 15th. So it's like Finding You for couples. For all other inquiries for couples, individuals, or families, private intensives, if you would like to attend the support group, if you are an alumni, you're welcome to do so. July 15th is the next offering. If you're looking for a coach or for a therapist who works in this model, go to our website and reach out to us through the portal or email us through the email address info@findingyouprograms.com. Next week, I'm going to be gone next week because I'm going to be in New York. Next week will be a broadcast that I call one of the first ones that I did. I think it might have been the first broadcast I ever did almost 19 years ago. I call it Guilt, Shame, and Accountability. That's Tuesday, July 21st at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I hope this was a helpful point of contact. I hope it wasn't too hard for you. I hope it inspired you to go look and to read and to understand. And on the other side is a greater life force than you can possibly imagine. You can use all the energy that you've been using to try to protect yourself, and you can use it to give gifts. Most importantly, gifts to the people that are closest to you. Thanks for showing up to these and for doing your work, because you doing your work makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.